So I think we've got enough people here. I think we've gone past the start time. So yeah, there's just a welcome from me really. We've got a good number attending the course. So thank you for joining us this Monday morning. Hope you enjoyed the weekend and the lovely late summer that we're having. My name's Carl. I'm going to be your host for this morning, along with colleagues from claims and sales, etc., other areas of the business. I'm not going to be on the call for long, so thankful. I want to hand over to the experts that know what they're talking about as soon as possible. But I thought I'd give you a bit of a housekeeping overview. You probably noticed that your cameras are muted, your cameras are switched off and your microphones are muted. But we do want you to get involved. Participation would be ideal in that regard. So if you've got any questions to raise to any of the experts, so jot them down in the chat facility, and then we'll ask them. But yeah, keep the questions coming. It'd be good to have your interaction. Session is, and we will be sharing the slides and also the recording shortly after the session, along with a bit of a survey as well, which we would appreciate you taking some time to complete to give us the feedback to hopefully improve these webinars going forward. And I think that's probably it from me. I've gone on long enough. I'm going to hand over to Alison, who's going to kick the session off, and on to colleagues from Zurich.
Thank you very much, Carl.
Alison.
Thank you, Carl. And I'm taking it as a win that at 10:30 on a Monday morning, I've managed to turn my microphone on before starting to talk, and you're not all telling me that I'm on mute. So good morning, I'm Alison Whittington. I'm Head of Housing for Zurich Municipal. Many of you will know about the long-term partnership we've had within Zurich Municipal with the public sector as a whole, but also to the housing sector specifically. As a result of this long-term work that we've been doing together, we understand the challenges that you face, and also more importantly, the work that's being done that's to mitigate these. In particular, we understand the financial and resource pressures housing associations face, whether it's from the rent cap, whether it's from the requirement to put homes to EPCC or better, the recent focus on damp and mould, the recent publicity around the focus on damp and mould, or the requirements of the recent Social Housing Act. All of those, plus the really high standards that housing associations set themselves to provide for the residents in a myriad of ways, all of those together, I think, are a bit of a melting pot and a bit of a crucible at the moment from a financial and resource pressure perspective. So, as you'd expect, we've been working hard in Zurich to look at ways in which we can make sure there aren't additional pressures coming onto that. And one of those is absolutely making sure we manage the increasing cost of claims the best way we possibly can. We closely monitor the cost of claims, as you'd expect, and we've seen how in particular, the cost of alternative accommodation has hugely increased in recent years. The demand has increased, and with availability reducing substantially, that means the cost has increased as well. Not just on a per night basis, but we're seeing an increase in usage of alternative accommodation when the worst happens to a property. So, as I say, 10:30 on a Monday morning, this is our opportunity for a rallying cry within this webinar, so we can all work together on this really important issue. It is the start of our journey together, and we'll be working in close collaboration to make sure that we can inspire and inform some, hopefully all of you. So if I look at a bit of Keynesian economics, there's the supply and there's demand. So while we can't necessarily influence the supply of accommodation, as in making more properties available for rent or more existing properties, that whole pressure on finding somewhere to rent exists in the wider economy, not just in this area. But we can better manage the situation when alternative accommodation is needed, whether it's trying to find new innovative ways to boost that concept of supply, even if it isn't building more properties, which of course, as an insurance company, isn't something that's necessarily in our wheelhouse. So going back to that economic side, it's not all just about supply, it's also about demand. And we've got some really great experts that over the next 90 minutes will explore opportunities to reduce that demand. and influence how long and the way in which people access alternative accommodation. Sometimes it's about how we can seek to keep people safely in their homes, or we work together smarter post an event. Having said all that, that's all about the mechanics of finding somewhere for people to spend time post a traumatic event to their property. But of course, we want to make sure that that end user experience is as smooth as possible, because after all, your customer is also our customer. And then finally, this isn't all about us looking to save money. It's about us looking to spend money more wisely. We've seen firsthand where the level of upheaval that's needed when people go into accommodation affects their lives and their well-being. It's not all about the financials, it's about the people as well. Almost enough from me so far. So in closing, I really just want to underline that this whole alternative accommodation topic, it's a really substantial part of our overall claims costs, and it's only getting higher. I think it's really important that we can work together, take new tools, take new approaches, so we can control the cost and give residents a much better experience. And I think if we can only really make it a success if we all pull together in exactly the same direction. So to hear more about this and to get us started, I'll hand over to you, Catherine.
Lovely, thank you, Alison. Good morning, everybody. I'm Catherine Shaw, a senior claims technician at Zurich, and I'm currently leading an important project to see how, as Alison says, we can better manage claims involving accommodation, improving the process for both our customers, whilst also reducing the spend in that area. We all know that our policies provide cover for accommodation when a property becomes inhabitable, but there are different ways that we can look at to achieve this. About a year or so ago, we were talking to ICAB, who you'll hear from later, and reviewing the amount we were spending on accommodation, the number of nights people were away from their homes, and the frequency of, say, moving between hotels. We knew that we could and we should make improvements to this. We came up with some proposals, and we've tried to test and learn in our personal lines business. We realised it was vital to liaise with our customers, adjusters, and ICAB to create the correct solution for each person impacted. This will improve the customer journey by talking with each resident to see what suits their particular needs. We realised too we could be creative and think outside the box, as long as the solution is economic and in line with the policy cover. So it's vital that we talk to all stakeholders as early as possible to find out what they want to do. Many don't actually want to move out, but sometimes we can keep them at home with a disturbance allowance or one of ICAB's bathroom or kitchen pods. Can they stay with family nearby? Do you have any void properties, or do others in your network have any that they would rent to us? It really is about understanding the key issue at day one. How bad is the damage? How long will repairs take? Has the leaking roof or pipe been fixed quickly, as repairs cannot start until this has happened? You'll hear from our fellow speakers talking about some of these aspects shortly. Thank you all for attending today. We all have a part to play in this, and by working together, we can only see a better customer journey and a reduced spend on accommodation, which can only help claims experiences in every sense. That's all from me, so I'll now hand over to Graham.
Hey, thank you, Catherine, and good morning, everybody. My name's Graham Finch. I'm a claims performance and reporting manager working within the claims function of Zurich. I actually have responsibility for kind of monitoring operational and financial performance for both motor and property. Now, I'll be going through with you some of the numbers that we see, just to, I guess, really put it into context in terms of the substantial increase around the spend that we're seeing in regards to alternative accommodation. Carl, can you move on to the next slide, and we'll get straight into the numbers here, I think. Thank you. Now, as I mentioned, I have a responsibility around both motor and property, and I've spent a lot of time over the last few years assessing the inflationary trends and pressure that we see. Now, for me, interestingly, when we talk about property claims, a lot of the focus over past years have more upon the increase in the cost of materials, the cost of labour. But actually, you know, as we kind of focused in on our analysis around alternative accommodation, you know, the inflation that we're seeing here is much more considerable than what we see kind of elsewhere within there. And for me, across both motor and property, I would say that alternative accommodation and the inflationary pressures there are probably up there as the, you know, one of the top two in terms of severity from what we're seeing. Now, the metrics that we've got on here cover trends over the last kind of few years. The headlines, so just looking at the top two visuals that we have there, in terms of our spend for Zurich UK Insurance, now this covers both Zurich Municipal Housing and also our personal lines home portfolio. In 2022, we spent just over 7 million through the year on alternative accommodation, and that was a 41% increase in spend to the previous year, so a considerable increase. So far this year, and the data here is up to date to the end of July, we've spent 4.53 million, and that's currently tracking at a 20% increase. So, you know, I would be projecting, you know, especially as we enter perhaps some of the winter months as well, perhaps we see that demand potentially increasing, dependent, I guess, on how the weather kind of tracks through. But for this year, we're potentially looking up to 10 million spend around alternative accommodation. Now, I think, Alison, you kind of touched upon some of the factors that are driving that increased spend. We can see that through the set of visuals that we have there with the 3 bar charts. And what these are looking at is the key levers which are driving that increase in spend. So we have the actual nightly rate, and we also have the duration that customers are within alternative accommodation, and both show notable increases. If we look at the duration, so the days, we had an increase of 10% in 2022 versus 21, and then a further 20% increase seen so far in 23. That is when we're tracking as alternative accommodation concludes. So it does kind of lapse between or cover both years essentially within it. But you can see a considerable increase there. Some of that we know will tie back to some of the trends that we spoke about in terms of the increase in the cost and availability of materials, the availability of labour and supply, etc. within there as well. We then see the accommodation rate. So the nightly rate increased 14% in 22 versus 21, and we're seeing a further 7% increase so far in 2023. So really, I think if both of these levers around alternative accommodation spend are increasing, we're really looking at a perfect storm, and really does explain why we're seeing that considerable increase within there. Ultimately, when we put these two things together, we see that the average settled cost has increased 24% in 2022, with a further 29% increase seen so far this year. It's probably quite I don't know if it's a sobering kind of set of figures to start the week off, but as you can see, this is why I think it's important for us to be having these discussions and looking at how we can tackle this side of it. If we move on to the next slide, Carl. So what's interesting, I think, for ourselves within Zurich is that when we look at areas in particular with a high population density, then we are going to see much steeper inflationary pressure than perhaps other parts of the country. Now, I think the availability of accommodation is a challenge, you know, across the country, but in particular for ourselves in Zurich, we do have a relatively high exposure towards Greater London. And I guess I couldn't have selected a more high population density area, but it's just to reflect upon the trends that we're seeing there and perhaps how they differ from other portfolios that we have. If we start off on this slide on the left-hand chart, which looks at the accommodation rate for Greater London, we can see there much more of a considerable increase in those rates. So our data shows that for central London, there's an increase in the nightly rate of 29% for claims settled in 22 versus 21, and a further 17% increase seen in this year's settlements. The analysis of our data outside of central London actually shows a lot more stability over the last few years. So again, where we've got those areas of high population, then obviously there's a greater demand. If that supply is not there, then obviously the way the economy works, the cost and the rate is going to go up. We also see that in some analysis which was undertaken with some of our actuaries as well on the right-hand side of this page. Now, I'm not going to go into background around burn cost or what that is within this call, but essentially what the chart is doing here is it's providing us with a view of our personal lines home portfolio, which is much more spread kind of across the UK, against a central London social housing portfolio. And essentially what this chart is doing is showing the inflationary trend, and it includes both cost and frequency, so volume as well coming through. And what we can see, I don't know if you guys can see the legend too clearly, but the orange line is essentially the central London social housing portfolio with the blue personal lines. And actually what we're seeing, there's much more of a considerable inflationary pattern within that central London social housing portfolio, within there of 20% versus 5% for the other aspect. So I do think that while we need to consider the impacts across the UK and across all areas, you know, I think it is worth noting that particular pressure in those high population density areas. Okay, so I think that was everything I was going to cover off in respect of the figures and metrics that we see around alternative accommodation, and I think that now leads on to me handing over to Tim Goodman from ICAB and to talk about what they are seeing within the marketplace as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, just a quick thanks to all the Zurich team for putting on the webinar this morning. We believe it's a really important subject matter, and clearly the figures and data and information that's shared today highlights the importance of alternative accommodation. So yes, I'm Tim Goodman, Managing Director at ICAB. I've been in the accommodation industry for over 20 years, solely looking after tenants and policyholders, obviously moving them out when they've had a claim within their property. We have grown the business from 3 of us back in 1998 to now 90 staff members solely providing accommodation. So we'd like to think we've got the experience. So just a little bit of history about Zurich and ICAB. So we started working together in 2017. In this time, we've received more than 4,000 instructions for Zurich claims, over 3,000 different postcodes we've accommodated in, over 2,500 escape of water claims, 600 fire claims, 73,000 room nights in hotels, over 100,000 room nights in self-catering accommodation, booked over 150,000 rental nights on ASTs. And again, as we talked about a little bit earlier, that we are first to market with the Airbnb initiative, which was to offer more accommodation options given what's going on in the marketplace to Zurich tenants. Next slide, please, Carl. So what I thought I'd do is just show you a couple of case studies for correct process of a claim and an incorrect process. And this hopefully will highlight where indemnity spend can be wasted, and with some initiatives and working in collaboration where we can reduce that spend. So the example I've got here is for a fire damaged property, Mr. and Mrs., 1 son and 1 daughter. The initial instruction was for 14 nights. Now, due to the ages and sexes of the children, we booked 3 rooms at a Premier Inn, including the meal deal and parking, and that's £340 per night. On night 7, We were asked and sourced a 3-bedroom serviced apartment for £135 per night. Okay, that was for a 3-month period. So the hotel costs were £2,380. The apartment was £12,000, and ICAB didn't charge extension fees. So we had a total cost of accommodation for this instruction for £14,530. So then if we go, please, Carl, to the next slide, what I want to show here is if we're incorrectly instructed, what can go wrong. We're all aware that the management of some claims do go astray. This results in higher than required spend. So again, we were initially instructed for a 3-night period, 3 rooms at the Premier, and again, including the meal deal and parking at £340 per night. We were asked to extend this stay 4 times, taking the hotel stay to 36 nights. And what we want to think about and should be thinking about here is how is a 3-night initial instruction turned into a 36 nights in a hotel. We were then instructed at that 36-night timescale to source a 3-month serviced apartment. Again, the apartment sourced was at £135 a night. So you now had £12,240 on the hotel costs, £12,150 on the apartment, and £160 in ICAB's extension fees, making that a total cost of £24,550. So by doing it correctly on the accommodation decant, 10,020 on was saved on the correct process. Now, if we multiply that by, let's say, 150 decants a year, where we all know there's a lot more than that, you're talking £1.5 million saving on just 150 decants. So it does really highlight the importance of correct instructions at point of timescale. We need to try and understand much quicker as an industry how long work is going to take so that we can book the accommodation correctly from the offset. Next slide, please, Carl. So again, this is just some data on the overall market cost. So you can see the sum of the accommodation cost from 2021 to 2023 is a huge increase from 38 million to 2023 at being 57 million. So the total cost of accommodation across the market has shown increases of 48% from 2020 to 2021, 22% from 21 to 22, and 24% from 22 to 23. Zurich, that's across the board as an industry. Zurich has shown similar increases and shows the market conditions are impacting all insurers. So just coming to the bottom left-hand side, you've got the accommodation rate. The accommodation rate has shown increases of 15% from 21 to 22 and 21% already in 2023. Now, this is mainly down to obviously the normal scenarios we hear: COVID, Brexit, cost of living, and obviously 2023 with life and everything going back to normal. So again, the middle box, average cost per settled claim from 12,000 in 2021, 15 in 2022, up to 20 in 23. The average cost per settled claim has shown increases of 23% from 21 to 22, and already 33% increase in 2023. And the final chart shows the duration in days. So again, the duration of stay has already shown increases of 9% in 2021 to 2022, and 20% already in 2023. Again, some of the reasons is the increase is due to supply chains, issues earlier in the year. The December surge hasn't helped. So I think it's really important with supply chain about getting the property fixed in quicker timescales, which has obviously been a problem, meaning that tenants have to be in accommodation for longer periods. Next slide, please, Carl. So the current state of the AA market and the problems that we're currently having. There's several factors that are affecting the AA market. A few of these that ICAB are seeing is high demand in hotels, especially during the summer months and holiday periods. Tourism and events are very much back on, and this increases rates. The rental market has considerably changed over the last few years. So there's several prospective tenants for a single rental property, whilst our industry tries to agree 1-year agreements with 6-month rental agreements are obviously much harder to agree. There's high demand for self-catering across the board, and pod utilisation is at an all-time high. It's becoming much bigger within our industry and our marketplace, so supply chain, Brexit and COVID. Just moving on, I think it's for me to look at the market and the costs. So costs across everything in our world have been increasing, and this obviously includes accommodation. So we've seen at ICAB the following increases. Increase in nightly cost for self-catering accommodation has increased to £12.75 per night, which equals to an increase of around 7.22%, which is below the 9.5% increase as per the ONS for the Restaurant and Hotels Pricing Index. We've seen an increase in nightly costs for hotel accommodation of £7.66, which equates to an increase of around 6.63%. Again, this is below the 9.5% increase as per the ONS data for the Restaurant and Hotels Pricing Index. The rental market has seen an increase in monthly rent of around 5.3%. This is also due to demand and not just inflation. So I touched on this point before. It's not unusual for my team here to be hearing of 12, 15 tenants lined up for one particular property that's available. So again, the good news is that ICAB are still below the average UK ONS percentage increase, but as hopefully this last few slides have shown you that unfortunately accommodation is very much on the increase from a cost point of view. So I believe that's me finished, but just to finish by saying that the important thing to remember is between us, the less that...
Tim, I think
Yeah, just to finish off by summing up quickly, that the less the claims are managed by us all the parties involved within the process of a decant or or looking after policyholders, the longer that it takes to work and the less that we collaborate, obviously the costs of accommodation will increase. Tenants and policyholders do not want to be in accommodation for long periods of time. So the quicker that we can move them back home, the better for all parties. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that, Tim. I lost your sound for a moment, so I wasn't sure what was going on. So thank you for persevering. Appreciated. Right, I'm going to hand it over to Gareth now. And as I think I may. If you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. I can't see the chat, so if other people on the call could keep a running total, would be appreciated.
Okay, thanks, Carl. You're breaking up slightly there.
But I'll have
just a quick introduction. Morning, everybody. For those who don't know myself, my name's Gareth Bowers. I work for McLaren's and I am head of major loss for UK and Ireland. Also look after some of our international business. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up? Yeah. Been doing this for quite a number of years, more than I care to mention. And you know, I don't think I would echo what Tim said. It's been more challenging. Do you want to move on then, Carl, please? Can you hear me?
it says it will do it, but 2 seconds. Yeah. Trying to,
There we go. There we go. So just a quick overview from me. I think, I would echo what Tim said. He's certainly outlined the issues quite articulately. I think Alison mentioned, how we all need to work together. And Catherine mentioned, our project that we've been working on, which I'll come on to in a sec.
Is that changed? Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Can people hear me? I keep. Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah, for those who are not aware what loss adjusters do, I think most probably are on this call. But essentially, we're at the forefront of the aforementioned issues. So we are instructed often by the insured or by Zurich, and we attend site and are definitely at the forefront and the aftermath of what's happened. It's a stressful situation, as we all know. And certainly in a devastating event, your mind has to be immediately for the customer and the resident. And you have to think, well, if this is deemed somewhere where it's not fit for habitation, what are we going to do? What I would say, I would echo the previous speakers. It is a team effort. It isn't just ourselves. I would suggest that we need help from Zurich, understanding their position in large losses. Quick decisions on policy liability would definitely help us. We also need help from your good selves, the audience on this call, whether that be housing associations, any public authority clients, real estate teams, managing agents. It is truly a collaborative effort. You guys know often the people and the leaseholders and the residents, much better than we do, know their needs, know any peculiarities. We need assistance from any intermediaries involved. And I think quite surprisingly, we do actually need a lot of help from the leaseholders and all the tenants themselves. So just to outline some of the parties that are involved and the fact that all those people play an integral role in sourcing the most appropriate accommodation if it's needed, and obviously mitigating that duration that we mentioned before. I'll talk a little bit in a moment about the policy cover. The policy frequently, almost certainly, provides for this cover where we have tricky incidents, causes unknown, we're not sure how the policy operates. Those sorts of discussions with Zurich, are required, and any decisions to accept policy liability quickly are greatly appreciated. And I think whilst we do have the policy cover in place, we are flexible. I think the days are gone of looking at an identical solution for somebody in a 2-bedroom property. We can only look at 2-bedroom properties. I don't think that's the case any longer in the current market, and I think we need to look at the economics, availability, duration, and suitability. Okay, do you want to move on, Carl? Can you hear me? I don't know if you can move on to the next slide, any chance? Thank you.
I am doing, Gareth, I think my internet is
lagging slightly. Okay, so what have we been doing? Well, I think as Catherine mentioned earlier, we have a project underway, have had for some time now. I think that involves a good consensus of people. It involves creative, collective thinking. So what are the mechanics of that? We have monthly meetings with ICAB and indeed others, where we look at our long tail cases. We particularly focus on those customers that appear to be in hotels for an extended period, even the service departments for an extended period. and if appropriate, how do we switch that to a more longer term solution if that is required for the duration of the repairs. We don't just do this once. We look at all the cases that are in that space every month, and we challenge pretty decently. We are always looking for to expedite with creative solutions, and we're always looking to make appropriate challenges to all of the stakeholders involved, and liaise with the Zurich team when we need to. I think for me, project management is definitely the buzzword. I think a lot of focus historically was placed on the project management of the reinstatement process, but actually this now feels like something we need to project manage. It feels like we need to have a focus on the very high cost short-term solutions. If it's appropriate, enter into a longer term agreement. Can we think outside of the box? We are always looking for more creative solutions. Tim won't like this, but it doesn't necessarily mean putting people into accommodation. It can mean a myriad of other things in terms of disturbance allowances, living with friends and family, sending people on holidays, et cetera, et cetera. If it's economic, all solutions are welcome. We are indebted to ICAB on a frequent basis. They're very good at finding this accommodation, but I think, as Tim mentioned, what we come up against is a challenge in terms of 6-month rentals, often turning into a year with no break clauses, when the reality is you only need two or 3 months. I thought I would talk a little bit about the policy cover. I think for those, wordings differ. This is just a typical Zurich wording that I've pulled up, and I've highlighted some bits in yellow. But I would encourage everybody on the call to look at the wording that's particular to their portfolio, their set of circumstances, their insureds and leaseholders, and just take a moment to understand what it is that is actually being said. So right at the top of the shop, typically, almost certainly, we are looking to cover loss of rent or temporary accommodation. That's quite important, where you're dealing with leaseholders who might terminate their tenancy in fairly short order. Then you'd be looking to pay that loss of rent. You wouldn't then be looking to house their tenant. So it's just quite important that we realise that it is either or solution that we're actually looking for. The next bit I've highlighted, the insurer will indemnify the insured, and by insured, we are talking obviously about the housing association, about the local authority, about the real estate concern, but often the policy will extend to also include leaseholders. There'll be some part of the policy which references that the leaseholders form an integral part of the insured. So we are talking about leaseholders, but the reason I identify that is the strict letter of the law. It is the costs that have been incurred that we will look at and ratify and determine if they are reimbursable. Now, practically it doesn't work like that. We are here to help. We are here to find those solutions. We are here to handhold. We are here to make this process as smooth as possible. But certainly where you've got large deductibles, which some of you might find yourselves with, this is your money that could be getting spent here. So we need to be sure we're spending that wisely and for the period that we need to and no longer. There are limits. Often the audience we've got here have large portfolios where the limits, I dread to think about those limits actually getting exceeded, but it's important that we know that there are limits that can be on a per building basis. So just be mindful that it's, isn't a blank checkbook. There could be a foreseeable scenario where those limits are under threat. And I think the last point is also quite important. I'll read it out. In respect of leasehold, shared ownership and factored housing, the leasee, shared or factored owner occupies the property. So what that means is we often can only deal with the leaseholder if they occupy the property. So if you have a scenario where you have multiple leaseholders in a property, multiple shared owners in the property, and they choose to enter into their own commercial concern with your permission to sublet that property, that is often a cost that we can't deal with. That causes considerable friction, and it's something that I choose to highlight deliberately, because there does appear to be quite an assumption that all costs are covered, but sometimes, you know, we can't do that. And friction in that heat of the moment, where the WhatsApp group gets generated by all the residents in the building that you're looking at, it's very difficult to manage. So any setting of expectation we can do there would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so moving on. So how can everyone on the call help? And as we've said, open to any questions here, any solutions, all and everything considered. The first thing I would say is the sooner we know, the less spend you will incur. We often find ourselves arriving at properties where people have been committed to hotels, for example, for a number of months before we even know an incident has occurred. That's very difficult to manage. People become quite ensconced in their hotel. They become ensconced in their service department. It's quite difficult to manage a scenario where you're looking to then move them for a second time to a longer term, more economic solution. So I would say I would encourage everyone to notify ourselves and indeed Zurich on the very first occasion that you believe even any accommodation may be required from an incident. I mentioned before the large deductibles. You know, this could be your money. You know, and we saw some of the figures, scary figures that were highlighted earlier on. If we're talking about losses within deductibles, you know, we aren't even going to Zurich. So just a sobering thought to bear in mind when you're looking at your bottom line costs. A thought I did have was any assistance with residents would be greatly appreciated. As I mentioned, you know, you probably know the people that are in these places, you know, better than we do. We've met them once. You might have met them on any number of occasions. One of the thoughts we did have was, you know, at inception or when risks are proposed, or certainly at renewals, consider reminding people, a little flyer, a little leaflet that says, in the event of something happening, this can be what you expect to see. If you've reviewed your wording and you understand that doesn't cover subletting people of a leaseholder, then why not put a phrase in there encouraging the leaseholders to enter into their own commercial policies for the concern of their tenants. I wanted to talk about void stock. I think we mentioned it briefly before. I'm somewhat surprised that we don't see more void stock. If I can be a little bit controversial, we do tend to see, you know, over to you, McLaren's and Zurich, you know, can you sort this scenario out, which of course we do. I know void stock is on a decreasing basis. The demand is high, as Tim said, and often there isn't void stock. But one of the things that I've certainly done recently is you might find yourselves in a scenario where the void stock isn't fit. You know, it might be within your maintenance program. It might need a new kitchen. It might need new flooring. It might need new furnishings. However, in the spirit of being flexible, when you look at the cost of paying to put a new kitchen in, paying to put a new flooring in, and making that void stock habitable on an expedited basis, that is probably going to be quicker in a lot of scenarios than entering into year-long rentals if our hand is forced to do so. So it's a bit of out-the-box thinking that we would encourage. And sticking with that subject, we could really do with lists of void stock. You know, if these lists are kept up to date, at the time of an incident, we're notified early. Let's have a look at that void stock. Let's go and look at a few. Let's understand if there's something we could do with an empty premises to make it habitable. Assistance with choosing accommodation. Quite a sensitive subject. We are very alive to the nuances of the individual, and it is very much an individual. You know, flat 2 has a problem, flat 3 has a problem, they're next door to each other. The customers are different, they're unique, they're individual, they have a set of needs. Tim mentioned earlier on about the 18 and the 6-year-old, son and daughter. We know that doesn't mean we can put everybody in the same room. But what we do see quite frequently, I don't know whether Tim's got any stats, perhaps we could ask him, that the number of properties that may not be perfect, they may not be absolutely ideal, but we repeatedly see 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 properties offered to customers, every one of them turned down. So we could do with your help in managing that situation, just to understand, why are these properties being turned down? Are they really because they're wholly unsuitable, or is it just a little bit of inconvenience factor that we're actually seeing? One of the other problems we get is contents clearance. The current economic climate means that contents cover is something that people are sacrificing. We arrive at a property full of either destroyed or not destroyed contents. We can't address the building. We spoke earlier about the duration of some of these repairs. We can do little with that until the contents are cleared. Now, Zurich are excellent. Where there is no cover for that, it's a case-by-case basis, looking at the individual circumstances. But there are occasions where, to facilitate buildings, we can assist with that. But the primary responsibility remains with the leaseholder and or the tenant. So all help you could give in rapidly removing contents where we need to would be greatly appreciated. Challenges with us doing it, actually, because we need to get all sorts of disclaimers signed. We cannot go touching other people's contents, especially where they're not damaged. It opens up a whole can of worms of, where we're moving them to, what was in there, documenting, photographing, for obvious reasons. We mentioned the contract duration. We are seeing extended durations. I think material shortages in those, high energy cost materials, things like plasterboard, timber, steel. Not only has the unit cost gone up, but their availability has certainly been extended. So contracts are being extended. We are also seeing contractors winning successful tenders, and between the point where they're allocated the tender to actually starting, they're looking for 10, 11, 12% increases due to inflationary costs. That market is flattening, I suspect, and we have never been tougher on the contractors in terms of their inflationary factors and the duration. But I think where we have incumbent contractors, the usual maintenance contractors that deal with your portfolios, that is excellent. But if they are inundated, if they're not able to get to work in an expedient manner, then I think we need to have a conversation about intervening, selecting alternative contractors, thinking outside the box and going elsewhere, appointing surveyors. And then lastly, not always that easy, do we have to move people out? Often the expectations are set straight away. Oh, well, this is insured, over to you, Zurich, sort me out and find a place for me. We try to have conversations early doors about people remaining in the properties. Tim spoke about the kitchen pods, about the bathroom pods. Sometimes difficult in the portfolio of the audience we have today. Often it's high rise, so can be decently challenging. But if it's big enough, we can make provision for that. We can make provision for some rooms to be turned over to such things. And often we can rotate things around the property room by room with an inconvenience allowance, a disturbance allowance. It's not always possible, but just think about these things. And we need everyone's help when we promote such an idea, which tends to get a lot of resistance. But actually, if we can be a bit firmer, a bit more robust as we can in a very stressful situation, that would certainly help. I think, talking to Paul and others, Zurich are definitely here to support, as are we, as is Tim, I'm sure. Any bespoke training, any sessions that you'd like with your managers, your asset managers, building managers, we're more than happy to attend, and we're more than happy to come along, have a look at the portfolio, look at some of the nuances that we could assist with pre-loss. If we understand what it would mean if the people had to be displaced ahead of an event occurring, then we're on the front foot. And then lastly, because I think we'll hear a bit more about this in a moment, I'd raise the question: is this part of the BCP planning? I'll just put it out there, because I think often we think about mechanical and electrical services. We think about immediately doing things to the roof. I think we think about emergency measures to make safe, to secure, turn water off, limit sprinkler damage. But actually, if the alternative accommodation aspect and what you're going to be doing with your residents, particularly if they're elderly, isn't in your business continuity planning and given some forethought, then I think you're missing a bit of a trick there. So that was me. Happy to take any questions now at the end. So I'll now pass you on.
Brilliant, thank you, Gareth. And I think what we'll be doing is taking questions at the end. So I think that's a great segue into my short piece on incident management planning, business continuity planning. Gareth, you've spoken and given us insight about the options. And I think really it is important that we consider these as part and parcel of our planning process. From my part, I'm a risk consultant at Zurich, and I support our customers or guide our customers on many aspects of risk management, including incident management and business continuity planning. And what I'll do is just spend the next 10 minutes just giving you a little insight or some practicalities into perhaps what a good plan should look like. And you'll see from this opening slide, I've said failing to plan is planning to fail. And it may seem a little bit glib. And actually, when researching this, I found out that it isn't attributed to Benjamin Franklin. That's just something on social media myth. But nevertheless, planning should carry gravitas. And I think, again, going back to some of the observations, and for many of you in the audience today, you'd be fully appreciative that in the middle of the night, when it's raining and we're having to decant, possibly, distressed and or indeed injured residents, clear heads that understand what needs to be done, what that approach or options are going to be, and who's going to do it is absolutely essential. So, talk a little bit about planning. Next slide, please, Carl. Whilst the slide flicks over onto the next piece, in effect, I've broken the presentation down into three parts as to what a plan should look like or what a plan could contain. On the left-hand side, I'm going to talk about the organisational approach to incident response. Then I'll talk a little bit about that immediate response, that golden hour. And again, this is linking into many of the things that we've heard about this early decision making and clarity around decision making. And finally, those longer term decisions that we need to make in terms of the longer term options and returning our residents back to accommodation. So first of all, in terms of the incident management structures, what I've found is that many organisations attempt to replicate the gold, silver and bronze tiers that you often see the emergency services using. And whilst that may be well and good for smaller organisations, what I tend to see is this can be overly complex. And what then happens is there's a lack of clarity around decision-making responsibilities and indeed actions. In other words, who's doing what and when. And also, again, when we start to introduce complex incident management structures, there is an issue, or can be an issue if we don't address it, around communication between those levels. And I think, again, the important thing is not all incidents will require a full-blown implementation of the organisational-wide incident management plan. So being clear what your incident management structure looks like and making sure that it's aligned to normal business as usual operational structures is really important. And I think linked to this is also what I would call notification and escalation. And again, this goes back to what we've talked about as early notification. You want the incident managed at the lowest appropriate organisational level. And I'll just repeat that, the lowest appropriate organisational level. What we want is to ensure that first responders should be able to, and should be equipped to assess the situation, make a call whether any additional resource and support is going to be potentially needed. And as part of this, they should know how to escalate the incident. And as part of that escalation process, it's involvement of insurers at the earliest appropriate opportunity. And of course, the other thing linked to this is out of hours. We all know that incidents happen at the most inopportune moment. And whilst having on-call rotas brings with it other considerations, employment terms and conditions, for example, relying on goodwill and a colleague to pick up the phone in the middle of the night is very much leaving matters to chance, again, for potential opportunities to make decisions early and appropriately to be missed. I think it is important, again, in terms of that on-call person, that there's the appropriate support, so that on-call person doesn't feel isolated and is empowered to make the right decisions at the right time. So having those incident management structures in place is just one part of it. What are we going to do? So that first golden hour, when the when the building is burning down, or that damage is being incurred. I think the one thing I would say is having a place of safety or place of shelter to which we can decant our affected residents to. That might be community centre, it might be church halls, might be vacant unused office accommodation. Primarily what we're trying to address here is the welfare of our residents. But what it is doing, it's providing us with breathing space. It gives us time to collect information, to understand who's been impacted, to start to understand what are the options that we have available to us, and to allow decisions and reasoned decisions to be made. And again, that's very, very difficult to do when people are leaving an impacted building and we're trying to understand those tenants' needs again in the middle of the night. So having access to a place of shelter is absolutely important. And also access to information. So again, thinking about, okay, our residents have been displaced. What do we know about our residents in terms of their needs, whether they are vulnerable residents? But also, what do we need to tell them in terms of what our approach is going to be in terms of allowances, disturbance allowances. So if they are considering going to stay with a relative, for example, how are we as an organisation going to respond in terms of disturbance allowance if they're going to incur, for example, additional travel costs to get their children to school because it's slightly further away? And finally, linked with that is also transport. It's all well and good having identified places of shelter, which we know we can gain access to in the middle of the night. But how do we get our residents there? Do we have access to local fleet of taxis? Do we have access to our own transport? Are we making it easy for our residents to get there? Or if it's going to be difficult, will they just simply make their own arrangements and we're then losing sight as to what their needs are going to be, short-term and long-term? Then finally, the longer term response is thinking about, again, as Gareth was talking about, what our accommodation options are going to be. And I think it's about being clear and realistic about those options. In many plans I've looked at, it often refers to mutual aid perhaps from other public authorities, from other social landlords. I would often question whether this is something agreed or simply written into the plan as an aspiration, because again, we know that, yes, I accept that we've moved on to from the immediate response, but we know that actually ringing up an alternative provider in our network and saying, what have you got available on the spur of the moment, may not produce the results that we desire. as opposed to something that we have planned and thought through, discussed, and perhaps even got an agreement in place with. We also don't need to lose sight, or mustn't lose sight of the ongoing resident support. And that's ongoing resident support, both in terms of their welfare, but also talking to them about a timely return to their property as well, addressing any fears or concerns that they may have. And as part of that, that is about ensuring two-way communication, understanding and responding to their concerns. So I think, that, yes, we are talking about properties, but I think as well as part of the planning, we need to be thinking about that resident support and the resources needed to deliver that. So just very finally, just to sum up, what I've said, though, as part of that, we need to consider our capacity, capability and collaboration. I think capacity, we can have a well-written plan, which looks great on paper, but we have the capacity to deliver that. And the capability as well is that, again, no one's going to look at a plan in the middle of the night when the floodwater is hitting. So how well trained and exercised are our colleagues in terms of delivering the requirements of that plan? And what lessons have we learned from previous incidents? But last of all, and importantly, collaboration internally. So, for example, our repairs teams may be very well versed in responding to property issues, but it's also as essential, as I've tried to illustrate, to ensure a joined up approach with our resident support teams, for example, and our communication teams. Collaboration externally, so again, with things like social housing providers in the network, local authorities, other landlords. It's also thinking collaboratively with our external key partners, as we've already alluded to, in terms of insurers, adjusters, and other partners such as AICAM. So what I'm not advocating here is that we write a plan which will detail or provide an A to Z roadmap of every single type of incident that will occur, but we detail a plan which is giving us options and a decision-making framework which addresses many of the concerns and challenges that we'll have in the cold light of day, rather than when the floodwater is lapping at the door. So that's a just brief insight into my observations around planning. What I'd like to do now is just hand over to Paul Reddington to sum the session up. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Martin. Next slide, please, Carl. For those that don't know me, I'm Paul Reddington. I work on the major loss team at Zurich, and our team sees the largest of our alternative accommodation claims following big fires, floods, explosions. And would you believe one claim I dealt with during COVID, I reserved at 3.5 million just on the alternative accommodation aspect. It involved the decamp of 100 flats. So as Graham's outlined and others have outlined, the spend here is absolutely eye-watering. And of course, we've talked about the human cost. But it's also a hidden cost sometimes, which sits on your claims experiences, which clearly is forcing up premiums. And it's something we all need to seek to address. So doing my short bit, I just want to sum up really some of the things we've heard, provide some final thoughts from a claims handler's perspective, and to talk about next steps before we open up to some questions. Some fantastic questions actually already come through on the chat. So next slide, please, Carl. I've got this interruption there. Why on earth have I got that phrase? Well, it's because when a factory suffers a fire, they deal with these type of fires too, there's as much attention given on mitigating and managing the lost profit as there is on the property damage. Why is that? Because that's often the largest part of the loss. We have forensic accountants to help us with that, other dedicated specialists. And we need to have the same sort of focus when it comes to alternative accommodation in the housing area. Is the BI of the housing market, and arguably it's more important because every single time it involves people's lives, not just pounds and pence. So it's our goal to help you really just give it that importance, and let's all work better to deal with it. It's collaboration and teamwork. So who is the team responding, as Martin said? Who's owning it? Is it the housing officer, or is it the managing agent? Is it your insurance officer that is? Is it someone specific in your organisation that steps up when you get this type of event to keep a cost centre? Because of course that's important, to capture all the costs of different expenditure and to own the relationship, if you like, with a loss adjuster like Gareth, with myself, and with ICAP, who updates your management team, who updates your press team if the MP comes knocking, things like that. As Martin said, all that's important to think about in advance. Yes, we can take a lot of that pressure away from you, but it's as important you remain involved and confident in the process. So collaboration and teamwork. Managing expectations, absolutely vital. So it's getting them to do our best, but the market is tough. They may need to travel a bit further to work or school temporarily, but we'll look to help them with the travel costs, for example. And it may just be that's all we can find. So we need to explain that properly to them. So communications between you as customers, your customers, and the likes of ICAB and the McLarens or whoever the loss adjuster is absolutely vital. And sometimes we may need to get tough. If it's the 4th or 5th flat that someone's rejected because they don't like the paintwork, it's unusual, but it does happen. That we need to work with you, obviously, to say to that resident, I'm sorry, but that's all there is. That links us into the next one, customer journey. So you're obviously, everyone on this call is very much our customers, but it's your customer that's impacted too. And as Alison said right at the start, as far as we're concerned, that's our customer as well. But you've probably seen, if you had a big AA claim, lots of noise is created, sometimes complaints. That comes into you, it comes into us, it comes into all sorts. And people hate hotels. They don't want to be there for very much longer. The novelty wears off, particularly have a family. People wonder why they're still there. We need to tell them how long they're going to be there and when they can get back in their property. So you need to tell us how the works are going. How well is your surveyor doing against the programme? Things like that. Are there bumps in the road that we can anticipate and deal with, just to manage those expectations? Because being removed from your home is traumatic enough. The last thing you want is a silence or a lack of communication, and you don't know when you're going to get back. So that's important. Next one, early intervention. We see late reporting, unfortunately, and late action too. So, of course, we know damage can worsen. Early intervention is absolutely key for, say, water damage. It avoids the development of mould with organic materials being attacked. For example, plasterboard and chipboard, damp environments are not good, of course, as we know. So it's important to get to those works early and to tell us when a claim could develop. Because it's important to get a handle on the alternative accommodation. Unfortunately, sometimes by the time we get the claim, people have been in the hotel days, weeks, and of course, we inherit quite a difficult situation. But equally, the knee-jerk reaction of getting someone out is not always appropriate. Sometimes they can stay in. And of course, we can make that work sometimes. We've talked about the pod situation. We've talked about disturbance allowances. We can come on to that a bit more. So there are all sorts of options. It's not just necessary always to move people out if it's a safe environment. And it's important to basically keep the focus. It's easy to think on day one, you've cracked it. Everyone's in hotels. Give yourself a round of applause, but that's not the end of the journey, of course. You may have fixed elite reported to Zurich, grade 2, but what next? And we often see claims that are drifting. And we forget where people are, who they are, how long they've been in rentals. Are they still in hotels? Not sure. So again, that level of coordination is absolutely vital to keep the focus, not just in the early days or weeks, but sometimes in the months that then follow in terms of that works program that I've mentioned. So that's it in summary. So what next? You're probably thinking, you learnt a lot, hopefully, and probably you've all experienced, or many of you, these type of claims where they've gone really well and sometimes where they've not gone so well. So of course, we'll share the slides, Carl said at the start, and also what we'll do is try to put together a digestible summary too of the key points that you've heard about over the last hour or so. So you can take that away. Also, think about what Martin said, perhaps go away, speak to colleagues about building this into your BCP if it's not already. Who's currently on point to deal with a mass decamp? Is it the right people? And what have you learned already from your experiences? Share that within the teams. What went well, what didn't go so well? And what can be done differently to improve the experience, both human and of course to improve the financial experience, which is affecting premiums. And reach out to us too, your CRM, your major loss contact, your RIC, whoever it is, because we want to work with you to improve this scenario. And we can do that on an individual basis as well. We can't solve, as we said right at the start, Alison's key point, one of those, was we can't solve the dearth of alternative accommodation. It is a crisis. I don't think that's unfair to say it, but by working together in collaboration, we can make things so much better than they are at the moment. Anyway, with that, thanks so much for your time. and we'll hand back to look at the questions that have appeared. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Hopefully that'll improve my communication issues. Apologies for any technical glitches there, but it is a Monday morning. But hopefully that didn't spoil your enjoyment and understanding of the the very detailed, very expert content that we delivered to you. Now, there's been quite a few questions coming in. I've not been able to keep a complete track on that, but if you want to bear with me, I'll just quickly look and see what questions we've got. If any of the speakers have noted and identified any that they want to jump in, please feel free. But the first one I've got, it says on claims involving property damage and third-party stolen vehicles, and the resident has to move out when there's damage to the flooring decorations, no contents insurance. Property ombudsmen are identifying the customer should be placed back in the position where they were prior to the accident. Is that a bit of a grey area? What's people's views on that sort of situation?
I don't know if you want me to have a chat.
Go
about
ahead,
that,
Gareth.
Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, I think the ombudsman's right. I think in that particular scenario, don't forget you have a responsible party, so you'll have a motor insurer who ultimately you'd be looking to make a recovery from. And I suspect what the ombudsman's talking about is the difference between reinstatement and indemnity. So I don't want to sort of new for old and indemnity. I don't want to confuse people there, but where you have a scenario where negligence has caused those contents to become damaged, the liability of the motor insurer, let's just say, is to put the customer back in the position they were prior to it happening. So you'd have a 5-year-old TV, they will recompense for a 5-year-old TV. Where there is contents cover prevailing, then of course the contents insurers would become involved, and if the TV were damaged, that's likely to be new for old, so they'd get their new television, but then could only recover from the motor insurer the value of the 5-year-old television. I don't know if that makes sense. I think one of the challenges we find is on an increasing basis, there isn't contents cover. It isn't the fault of the leaseholder or the individual that the tanks sprung a leak, right at the top of the building, and it's certainly regrettable, but that does not make their contents covered where they are the individual leaseholder's contents. If you have an identified third party, then of course they can join in any action with us, with Zurich, and all those other parties to present that claim to the third party.
Okay.
Hope that makes sense.
No, that's great, Gareth. Thank you very much. A twofold question here about: do we cover the storage costs of storing customers' possessions, and then also a little bit more expand on the subsistence payments to try and when people remain in their properties, please.
Shall I lead off on that one?
Yes, thank you, Paul.
Yeah, often we get circumstances where people's contents are either damaged as part of the event or even not damaged but need to be moved out to facilitate those works. Now, if they're damaged, obviously what they should do is contact their contents insurer, but as we know, very few, certainly social housing tenants have contents insurance, and sometimes they may think it's the responsibility of the housing association, local authority or real estate owner to cover their contents, and of course it's not. But in those circumstances, particularly if the tenant can't afford to shift and lift those contents, we need to do it. So yes, we will, almost as an enabling cost. Will we store it? Sometimes we'll have to, but that can be a bit of a challenge. Everything has to be done with the consent of the resident. As was said earlier in the call, we can't lift and shift contents which are not ours or not our customers, so we need to get that agreement. So that's sometimes a challenging situation, but sometimes we do it. Subsistence payments. So yes, that's very much a conversation that you need to have with the loss adjuster or with Zurich if it's a major loss, because we can make that work. It could vary dependent on where the person is or what that subsistence looks like, but we can make it worth their while to stay in. For example, to put up with the slight hum of a dehumidifier, maybe a bit of annoyance, but if they want to be in, it's not a health and safety issue. issue, then we can make it work. And of course, that may be cheaper than moving them out, far more convenient for them to stay where they are. And if there's a question set there about moving them around. Absolutely. So that can be a conversation with whoever's project managing the works about, we'll start in the bedroom first. Someone might want to sleep in the living room temporarily if they're happy to do that. And then we'll rotate. So that's very much a conversation with the loss adjuster and the contracts manager to make it work, but it can be done. We just need to be a bit more creative about this stuff, because the knee-jerk reaction of getting people out isn't always appropriate if it's safe to stay in the property.
Smashing. Thank you very much. And this is what you, Tim, you didn't mind. Someone's mentioned about sort of the facility or the availability of when you're getting a call after midnight. What's the process in place there, please? Oh, I think you're on mute. You're on mute, I'm afraid, Tim.
Sorry, one of us had to do that, right? Yeah, it's a great point by William. So the problem, and we're in the process of changing it, but without getting into too much detail, when you've tried to do it, you get an instruction at 10 to midnight, and we go onto live portals such as Premium and Travelodge at 10 past to book the room. It thinks you're booking for the next night, so it can't backdate because the day's already gone. So it's very rare for clients to turn up at a hotel at 3 in the morning, whereas obviously some of our tenants have to. So we're working with head office with these sort of organisations to be able to backdate. You can't call night porters, they're effectively security guards. So you're not going to get your commercial sorted at 3 in the morning with a night porter. So from Premier and Travelodge point of view, we're in the process of trying to get them to change it on the live portals. I think as well, we've got a new upscaled out of hours office. So that's with more staff. It has developed over the years. It used to be you'd get one call every other night at 2 in the morning. It's very much changing and becoming a very busy part of our office. So happy to talk you through that, William, in more detail, and we can reach out to each other offline after this call.
Smashing. Thank you very much indeed. One here about, does the accommodation have to be commensurate with the value of the property? So if somebody lives in a high net value house, do we have to sort of give them something akin or on par with that?
Yeah, I think this comes down very much to wording within the policy. So you might live in a very big, expensive house, but not have a high net worth policy. In the main, yes, they are entitled for this like for like reasonable accommodation. So I think it's probably more important for these type of tenants or policyholders that if they're going for high net worth, that we manage the timescales even better, so they're not sitting in £300 a night hotels. But often they think they're high net worth, and often their policy wording, they're not.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think the equivalence point is quite an interesting one, and in fact it can work in the reverse. Yeah, people are generally entitled to have more or less what they had before. So if you have a 2-bed property of a certain type, that's what you're entitled to, if we can find it, if Tim's team can find it. But interestingly, if we're going to insist you can only have a 2-bed property, and there aren't any 2-bed properties, but I tell you what, there's a 3-bed down the road, which is a hell of a lot cheaper than the hotel, we'd be prepared to look at that. We need to manage the expectations that that's not the norm, that you've now got a 3-bed rather than a 2-bed. But how ridiculous is it to wait for a 2-bed when you're racking up a fortune in the Premier Inn? So again, I see Tim's nod is we can be flexible at Zurich to give that assurance that yes, if a 3-bed's all we've got, let's go for it. So it can work in the reverse. Someone get a nicer property inadvertently. It's rare, but sometimes it can work that way as well, because it's just the right thing to do.
Brilliant, thank you. And where do we stand for accommodation for pets with kennels, etc.?
So,
Catherine, do you want to deal with that as well? See, Catherine champing at the bit there as well, Tim.
Go, Catherine,
you do lots of pet decamps, don't you, Catherine?
Most policies cover pets as well. Most rental properties won't accept pets, so that can be a challenge as well. But the policy does cover the cost of, or most policies covers the cost of kenneling, but most owners unfortunately don't want their pets to go into kennels, so that is then another challenge. And It's about having the conversation, trying to find the right thing. You know, we've previously built a kennel in the garden of a rental property many years ago. What can we do that's different to help that customer, but the costs somehow are generally covered by the policy?
Smashing. Thank you very much.
Ken, are you gonna
There's a
say
couple.
Yeah, can I just
Oh, sorry.
jump, just
Yeah.
add to Catherine's point, just from an accommodation supplier's point of view, we accommodate pets in hotels all day, every day. So just as an FYI, don't be put off if they have numerous pets. So as an example, Travelodge will take 2 domestic pets per room. So to put the 2 cats and 2 dogs, we often can split Mr. with one child and Mrs. with the other, and then accommodate all 4. And there's some really interesting pets that we've accommodated over the years.
Brilliant, thank you. So a couple of people are asking for more information on kitchen and bathroom pods. I'm just thinking, when we send the recording and the slides out, is there any literature we could include at the same time? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Or go
Smashing.
to ICAP's website.
Okay.
They've got a pod page where it shows how they're delivered, installed, the speed, what they look like, etc., etc. So yeah, go to our website.
Brilliant, thank you. Question here about using a rolling stock of 4 voids for decant instance. If it becomes necessary for a long-term decant, is it possible to split between the loss of rent and the alternative accommodation, or is it going to be one or the other? Is there a sort of an amalgam that could be utilised?
Gareth, do you want to
Yeah. Frequently, you know, this is a very common scenario, and it isn't one size fits all. So Paul referenced a case earlier on. We had circa 100 people right at the start of COVID to accommodate, and that does look like a mixture. Some leaseholders will say, look, I'm really sorry, Mr. or Mrs. Tenant, there's nothing we can do. My place is destroyed. You're going to have to go and find somewhere else. So then that converts almost instantly into a loss of rent for the duration. The people next door won't want to do that, and or our owner occupiers. So you're looking at accommodation costs. When I said it's either or, it's either or for the individual leaseholder or the customer in that property, and that can be a mix. That can be a mix of the immediate short-term accommodation for that tenant, if the policy provides for it, for a few weeks in a hotel. At the end of that 2 weeks, that tenant might say, do you know what, I'm going to go my own way, and then it will then convert into a loss of rent claim from that point on. So it is a mix. We've done some weird and wonderful things. Just to highlight a couple, within the same building, we had an individual who was incapacitated, had quite a severe disability. The most appropriate solution for that person is we sent them to a specific complex for their needs in Mexico, of all places, and in actual fact was vastly more economic than any solution we would have found in the UK for that individual on a longer term basis. We've also paid somebody's mortgage. I think in this particular claim I'm thinking about, they were due to sell their flat, couldn't sell their flat. They would have been entitled to alternative accommodation, but given their flat couldn't be sold until the end of the period of repairs, we paid their mortgage on their new place, which of course they couldn't pay if they hadn't sold their old place. It was vastly economic, and the reason I reference those two is that certainly with conversations with Paul and his team, you know, we can be flexible. You know, if you have ideas or become aware of ideas and solutions, then great. You know, we are all ears.
On the back of that, about voids, back to voids, I think we've had cases where customers said, well, we do have a void, but it's not fit for habitation at the moment, it needs a new kitchen. So we've thought, actually, we'll pay for the kitchen because it's been a hell of a lot cheaper than putting up someone in a 12-month let. Yeah? There may be a discussion to be had later about the reciprocal value of the kitchen we've put in. We can park that. Yeah. The main thing is let's get someone in that void. So that's another thing we can potentially do, thinking outside the box. That's good. Just conscious of the time, we've got 4 minutes left and 2 questions. Oh, something else has just popped in there. So let's see what we can do with. If we don't answer all the questions, we'll address them in the content that we send out to you later. So
I'm going to link this next question in, and it's to do with the communication. If a tenant turns down appropriate alternative accommodation, what power do we have to sort of nudge them in the right direction, should we say? And also, if a tenant is in a hotel, as you alluded to, Tim, how do we ensure that, you know, ICAB and ourselves and adjusters are all saying, well, you're in that accommodation now, let's move you to something a bit more appropriate? How can we sort of, I've tried to amalgamate 2 or 3 questions there.
Shall I do the first bit and Tim could do the second bit?
Paul.
So in terms of those people, there are a few, not many, that will keep turning down. I referenced it in my little bit. Yes, we can help you to get tough with that resident. Now, you're going to know that resident more than we do, and perhaps they have a pattern of being difficult, I don't know. And it may be, look, the average thing we're looking at is £2,000 a month. We've shown you 5 of them. Okay, you've turned every single one down, some for good reason, some for not good reason. We can pay you that money then, and you find somewhere yourself. So again, as another way of dealing with it, but we're going to need absolutely your input. We wouldn't want to do that independently and without your say so, because we're going to upset your resident perhaps. But we will need to have that conversation with you about getting tough, and sometimes we need to. Tim, the second bit. You're on mute again, Tim. I think.
This is where it comes back down to collaboration between all of us, because obviously we don't visit site. We have to rely on our colleagues in the industry to advise us on timescales of how long work's going to take. We don't want to be extending time and time again. So the quicker that we're told that it's going to take 2 months, we want to get them out of the hotel into the appropriate accommodation. So this is where collaboration between suppliers, claim handlers, housing associations, the more people involved and giving us an idea of timescales, the more appropriate the cost, the better the customer journey is, and also it reduces spend. So we do need to keep talking, coming up with initiatives between us to improve that part of the process.
Absolutely. And I think I thought there was another question there, but reading through it, it's really more of a comment than a question. I think it just reinforces and reiterates what we've been talking about. There's mention about sort of complaints and tenants not being involved in the discussions and the communication, left without information for some time, and then also involving them in the decision-making process makes it more efficient and, you know, leads to the cost reduction and a better journey for all.
Yeah, it does. Carl, if I could just one thing I would say, if there was, if you had like you know, all these webinars, you think, well, you know, what is one thing that would be, you know, extraordinarily helpful? Certainly for us at all of the entities, the audience that we've got on the call, if it was within your gift to identify an individual or a group of individuals that are the go-to people for helping us with alternative accommodation, you know, that would be terrific. You know, often we find ourselves in a position where, you know, we're not sure who to go to help with this. When a tenant keeps declining properties, you know, we could do a joint visit. You know, we could go with your people who are in charge of residents and say, look, you know, what is the actual issues? There might be something we've missed. There might be a unique set of circumstances which made all the previous 5 that ICO came up with. Well, yeah, actually, we agree with you. They weren't suitable, but knowing what we know now, here it is. So if we could possibly have a work stream of identifying who are the go-to people at the various insureds, housing association, real estate entities, that would be terrific from our point of view, because, you know, I think, as we've all said, collaboration, you know, these things all work better in that respect. Brilliant. Thank you, Gareth. And that's probably a good point to finish on. It's 12 o'clock, so we're there or thereabouts. So I just want to thank to all the presenters for taking the time to join us this morning and deliver the content, which was thoroughly enjoyable, thoroughly interesting, and really informative. As Paul says, this is the start of the process. We'll be reaching out to you, and we'd ask you to reach out to us to give you a bit more support, give you a bit more information, see what we can do to help each other here. But the content will be shared, and if you've got any questions, just let us know. But thanks for your time. Have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.